All right, hey guys, welcome. I'm glad you're here today. It's good to see you. So, if you're new, just so you know, bathrooms are like in the back corners. You go find your way back there if you need to. Super casual. Get up, get some coffee if you need to. That kind of stuff. You're welcome to move about however you please. So, I'm glad you're here today. We're going to start with a couple of quick announcements. The first one is that Tuesday, our neighborhood walk is at 5 o'clock. So if you could come out, this past week, the weather was amazing, and people were out and about in the neighborhood again. You're not having to search out to find to find somebody to be friends with. People are out and about and they're moving, and so come be here Tuesday at 5. The other thing is I'm going to exit out of this. I'm going to show you this. There's a new tool I want to show you guys where we're on our website called Plan Your Visit. And so if you want to invite somebody to church and you send them to our website, somebody's got invites, okay? And you want to invite them to church, you can go to our website and there's this new button. It's just this little pop-up right here, and it will stay with the page. It's on every page. It says Plan Your Visit. And so you can click on that, and what they do is they'll put their information in there. They'll put their email and their phone number in there. What it will do is it'll send them a text that says, hey, thanks for planning a visit to Table Community. We're excited to see you on Sunday. And then it'll send one right away, a text message, email, and then they'll get a text message and an email 24 hours before. So the day before they're reminded, oh yeah, Alan invited me to church, and now I should plan to go. I should plan to get up in the morning. And then I think it sends another one like 2 hours before. So you remember that morning as well. And then if they come, they get a follow-up message, like a thank you message as well. So I would encourage you to use this when you invite people to church. Just click, Plan Visit. We've had a couple people already this past week who have just visited our website and said, hey, they plan to visit for one next week and one the following week. And so, it's a great tool, and it just gives people an easy reminder. You invite them, but you invite them on Monday, they forget by Saturday night. Let's be honest, right? We all work that way. And so I would encourage you to use that to help invite people to come to church. So, all right, I'm going to pray. We're going to worship. Does that sound good to you guys? All right. Dear Jesus, thank you so much for a beautiful day to come and to worship you. It's so good to come and just sit in your presence with other people. We can sit in your presence any day, but there's something special about coming and doing it with people that you love. And so, Jesus, today we just ask that as we worship you, that you would get all the glory from what we sing today. And that as we look at your scripture and we listen to your words, that you would speak into our lives and speak into our hearts. And we just ask that we would be open to whatever change it is that you want to do in us today. We love you and we lift your name up. Amen.
You guys go ahead and stand. Let's worship together.
We have come to give you glory. We have come to give you praise. We have come to give you glory. We have come to give you praise. Welcome in this place. Welcome in this place. Welcome in this place. Welcome Welcome in this place. Welcome in this place. Oh, have you way, 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 have you way. Oh, have you way, have you way, have you way. Have you way, have you way. Sing bless the Lord and bless the Lord, oh my soul, and let all that's within me shout out, shout out. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, and let all that's within me shout out, shout out. Shout out, shout out, have you way, 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 have you way. One more time, all together, wave come. We have come to give you glory. We have come to give you praise.
we thank you for the way that you come, God. We thank you that, Lord, you're a God who is worthy of worship. So, God, we trust you today. We thank you for who you are, God, and what you've done for us. Just pray that you speak to us today through your message, through our worship. Would you help us to open our hearts, open our ears, and be responsive and receptive to what you have to say to us. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. You guys can be seated.
Amen. All right. Hey, thank you guys so much for leading us in worship. Don't they do a good job? They do a good job. Beautiful, beautiful. Hey, Elizabeth, we hit those lights for me. You know I don't like preaching in the dark. Good deal. All right. Hey, so we're beginning a new series today that I've been telling you about for a few weeks. Everybody sat in the middle today. Alan, I'm just going to look at you today, okay, man? So we're beginning a new series today. I hope this thing is not about to restart on me. We'll see. It keeps doing this little thing. I hope we're not going to update in the middle of my message. We'll see. Anyways, so we're starting this new series today called Crazy Talk, when Jesus has ludicrous things to say. And so we've been working through the book of Mark, okay? And now we're to the part of the book of Mark where we're in the last week of Jesus' life before he goes to the cross, okay? And so last week we kind of looked at Palm Sunday, okay, and Monday as well. And so this week is kind of the middle of the week, and Jesus, as he gets closer and closer to the cross, his teaching starts to intensify. And there's a couple of chapters there at Mark where normally you just read through and you go, I don't know what he's talking about, right? Just skip to the part about the cross, okay? But all the stuff that we're talking about over the next few weeks happened in that last week, and what we would celebrate as Holy Week, on the way to the cross. And so these teachings, they seem really, really intense at times, and they challenge us in great ways, and because of that, we tend to ignore them. But these are also passages. I think Jesus taught on this stuff. He teaches us throughout it, but these are the things that he chose to talk about the week before he goes to the cross. So I think we should pay attention to them and what they have to say. Do you agree?
I agree.
All right, good. Okay, before we jump in, I'm going to give a quick history lesson. Who likes history? Like a few of you, I was more of a science guy. But I'll give you a quick history lesson, okay? We're going to talk for a minute about the early Christians and who the early Christians were and kind of how they were perceived within society. So the early Christians, I'm talking about Jesus' disciples and their disciples and the early converts. So in the first few hundred years of Christianity, early Christians were a persecuted minority. Okay? So we're not a persecuted minority in the United States. We may be becoming a minority, and we may be criticized, but we're not persecuted, okay? Nobody in Christianity in the United States has been killed for it recently, like we see in places in Africa and that sort of stuff that we've kind of seen on the news lately, okay? But the early Christians, they were a persecuted minority, but they were really interesting because they also prayed for their civic leaders, and their civic leaders were the ones that persecuted them. So the Jewish people, they were under Roman occupation. Rome kind of kept them in control by crucifying people on a regular basis. And Christians were an extension, they were seen as an extension of Judaism, and the Jewish people didn't like them all that much, and the Romans didn't like them all that much, and so they were a persecuted minority, but they prayed for their civic leaders. They prayed for the Romans, okay? But they also prayed for the Romans' enemies, okay? So they prayed for their civic leaders, but then they also prayed for their national enemies, and they served their national enemies as well. This is why Rome didn't like them, okay? You should hate the people that Rome hates, right? That's the way they look at it. But they paid their taxes to Rome, okay? They paid their taxes, okay? They obeyed the Roman laws, but they would have never, it wasn't like a pledge of allegiance to Rome, but they never would have said a pledge of allegiance to Rome. You have to understand this. You're like, why not? They obeyed the laws, stuff? Would they be committed to that government? Well, that is the government that crucified their Savior. Okay? That's the government that crucified Jesus. And so they would never have called Caesar Lord. Okay? They never would have called Caesar Lord. And because they wouldn't have compromised on their singular allegiance to Jesus. Okay? And I choose the word allegiance on purpose. I could just say devotion, but I think allegiance captures it better. And so they would have acted like foreigners and exiles within the land, okay? Even though that's where they're from, they would have acted as if they were foreigners, that they didn't belong to that country, they didn't belong to that kingdom, they belonged to another kingdom, okay? And that's the reason they were regularly persecuted. And that's the way it went until about the 4th century. And then what happened in the... Man, can you turn this down a little bit? It is like... Got a lot of feedback today. What happened in the 4th century? Does anybody know? Any history buffs? Guy named? Constantine. Yeah. So Constantine comes along, okay? And Constantine comes along, he's the emperor, and he decides that he is going to make Christianity the official religion of Rome. Okay, and so he marries Christianity with the Roman government, and he militarizes it, and then all of a sudden Christianity gets really, really popular. It becomes really popular. Is this on at all now? Okay, good. All right. I was so out earlier. Now I feel like there's nothing there. Okay, so he popularizes Christianity, and so before Christianity wasn't very popular because, you know, they're seen as foreigners and exiles, and they're getting crucified and persecuted all the time. Okay, and now they're like, you know, so Jesus would say, this is what it looks like to be great in my kingdom. And now all of a sudden, all the things that were great about being part of the Roman kingdom are attached to Christianity. So you got military might, you got access to like worldly authority and all those kinds of things. And ever since then, Christianity has been attached to different governments in different ways. And it's really had a struggle within its identity because it's trying to serve two masters, as Jesus would say. And so today's message, we're going to get into what Jesus has to say about that. And so this message is one of those things. It's been a long time coming for me. It's one of those things that's like, I knew at some point I needed to talk about it, but I didn't really want to talk about it. But this is a great thing about going through the book of Mark, is you don't miss anything when you go chapter by chapter. Okay, you also don't get to skip anything, all right? So today is about identity, okay? Your identity in Jesus. Turn to your neighbor and say, it's about identity. Yes, okay. All right, y'all don't know that, but pastors use that as a technique so they can find their place in their notes. And so this is one of the things that very few Christians wrestle with. We're going to talk about today. And the reason that very few Christians wrestle with this issue is not because it's like some small issue that we don't want to deal with. It's because it's a very, very big issue. It's a huge issue that most people don't want to take the time to spend with, because when you do, it's going to make you rethink your faith. And it's actually it's an issue with, of like eternal magnitude. It's one of these things, one of these parts of Jesus' teaching. When I finally started to grapple with it a few years back, it was one of those things that made me just rethink a lot of my faith and what I was committed to. And so, and it's just one of these things that's a really big issue because it challenges some of the ideals that have been embedded in us by our parents and by our society. Okay, and so it's a really big issue. You know, those little small issues that most people don't wrestle with, those are the things we like to talk about. Okay, this is a really big issue, so we don't like to talk about it. And the last guy I know in Greer that preached on this topic, he preached on it regularly, and his church ran him off. Okay, so and then he came to table for like a month. It was great. But so today should be fun. Okay, and I want you to know you're welcome to disagree with me. You're welcome to disagree with my text, the way I read the text here. If you disagree with it, that's fine. There's like another church down the road that'll teach you differently. And so, you're welcome to disagree with it, but it is part of Jesus' teachings. So I would encourage you to grapple with this text, whether you like my take on it or not. Okay, so today's message will have a very Anabaptist flavor to it. If you don't know what that means, I'll explain it to you later. But you can explore this more with guys like Scott McKnight or Brian Zahn or Greg Boyd. They'll take it much farther than I do, okay? And so I'm fully aware that I might be pushing the limits for some people today, and I'm okay with that. But Just don't be too mad at me, okay? All right, so how many of you guys love America? I love America, right? I love everything about America. Well, not everything, but a lot of things, okay? I like the food here. We have really good fried chicken. Like, if you haven't gone to Irish Chicken yet, I'll take you out this week. We'll go. It's going to be delicious. It's going to change your life, okay? I love the people in America. I love the cities in America. I like the national parks. I like to go. I like to travel in America. You know, it's just one of those places, you know. I love the Olympics. I like the Olympic team, right? When somebody from our country runs first place and they're standing on the podium and they're playing the national anthem and they're tearing up and I'm tearing up a little bit, and it's like you spend your whole life learning how to pole vault and somehow I feel connected to you in this moment because we're both Americans, you know. And so it's one of those places that I love, but would you say that like you love everything about America? Right? No, everybody says there's something they don't like about America, but we choose to live here and deal with those problems than live anywhere else. But it's a complicated relationship. You know, if it was a Facebook status, it wouldn't say happily married. It would say it's complicated. Okay? How many of you guys, we think back to the 2016 election, how many just love that year? Like it's one of your favorite years of your life, right? Trump versus Hillary, right? It doesn't matter which side you're on. It was like a terrible time in America. You know, everybody was just mad at everybody. And who's looking forward to the 2020 election, right? Who's excited to do that all over again, right? Nobody is, okay? And so we kind of have this love-hate relationship, not necessarily with America as a land and as a people, but with the American government. It can be kind of tricky. How many of you pay your taxes yet? Like Alan just, yeah, okay, April 15th, guys, it's coming. You got to do it. And so, how many of you enjoy paying your taxes every year? Some of you might get money back, but even if you get money back, you look at your pay stub throughout the year, and how many of you just look at your pay stub and see the taxes taken out and go, man, I'm so glad they did that, right? None of us, right? None of us think all the laws in America are perfect. There's a law in South Carolina that you must be 18 years of age to buy a pinball machine. Okay, so like it's not perfect. Okay, and so Jesus looks at this law today that would have been one of the most controversial laws at the time. It wasn't very popular, and it's not just about today's not just about whether that was a good law or not, whether you should pay your taxes or not. It's really a case study in Christian identity. And if I understand Jesus' teaching on this, then I understand what it means to be better committed to Jesus. And the example he uses here is really government, but the implication goes much farther. It's much more farther reaching than that. And so today we're talking about this thing of how sometimes we have a dual allegiance, right? And Jesus, the example here he uses is having an allegiance to God on one hand and to government on the other hand. And so it's really this thing of whether we're supposed to have one foot in this world and one foot in another world, and whether or not we're supposed to serve two masters. And a lot of pastors will preach the serve two masters part, and then the next Sunday that they can preach on like serve two masters, not serving two masters like God and country, and it's like those are two, those aren't two masters. Right, and so like we apply that to everywhere else in our life, but I think that's why Jesus picked this example and why it's kind of a pain. Okay, and so the thing I want you to know today is Jesus is calling you to one allegiance. Jesus is calling you to one allegiance, that you can't serve two masters, and it's not just because Jesus doesn't like it, that God doesn't like it. And that God wants all the glory. He does want all the glory, but God just doesn't want all the glory because he's greedy. He knows that if we arrange our relationship with him in this way, it not only recognizes him for who he is and respect and commitment that he deserves, but it also works out in your favor. That's the way the covenant relationship with God works. So that the extent to which you to say, hey, I'm gonna serve two masters. To the extent to which you do that, you're robbing yourself of the true rich life that God has for you. That's God applauding what I'm saying, right? And so when we look at the Bible, we start out with the creation story. The creation story is a story about two people that have a relationship with God. They're supposed to be fully committed to God. All of a sudden, their commitment to God, their allegiance to God is divided, it goes terrible for them, okay? Then you have the Old Testament, that's about Israel. They're supposed to be this nation fully committed to God. Okay, and so they're committed to God for a while, and then they're like, God, we would like a king. We would like an army. All of our neighbors have kings and armies. Wouldn't it be great if we had them too? And God says, no, I'll take care of you. I'm your protector. And they're like, no, but we would like one. He says, okay, if you say so. And it goes terrible for them, okay? And then we get to the New Testament, and there's this story of Jesus, and Jesus comes as the one true king, and he's come to reclaim and to restore his people because their relationships have gotten twisted, they've gotten idolatrous, and rather than having a full commitment to God as a people, they've chose to split their commitment up in different ways. And so today we're looking at this passage. We read in Mark 12. I'm going to read from Luke today. It's a parallel passage where the Pharisees, they come and they ask Jesus this really, really tough question. And Jesus gives them what seems like a really radical, extreme answer. And to understand his answer is to understand something at the heart of Jesus. And it's this, is that we do not have dual allegiance or citizenship. That our whole allegiance is to Jesus, and that our whole citizenship as his followers is in Jesus' kingdom, which is not of this world, right? It's in this world, it's breaking into this world, it's here, it's now, but it's different. It answers to a different authority than the people in this world. And so often as a church, we've confused people by giving the impression that you can have an allegiance both primarily to God and to anything else. And a lot of times, we would say that that's the American flag or something, and that somehow to be a good American is what it means to be a good Christian. It's just not what Jesus taught. And so we're going to look in Luke chapter 20 today. And this will parallel what he read this week, what we read this week as a church. So Luke 20, it says, keeping a close watch on him, they sent spies who pretended to be sincere. This is Caesar and the religious leaders working together. So keeping a close watch on Jesus, they sent spies who pretended to be sincere. They hoped to catch Jesus in something he said so that they might hand him over to the power and authority of the governor. So the spies questioned him, Teacher, we know that you speak and teach what is right and that you do not show partiality, but you teach in the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? So the Pharisees come to Jesus, and this is what they started. They said, Jesus, you're so smart. Jesus, you're so smart. Will you help us with this question? And the question they ask is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Would have been one of the most burning political questions of the day. Because remember, Rome controls them by basically just crucifying people on a regular basis. So it's just like this reign of terror, and that's how they keep things peaceful. Okay? And so this would have been a burning political question. It's a very clever question to ask. Because you remember, Jesus has come to Jerusalem, and all of his followers think that they are with him there because Jesus is going to be made king. And so they think, okay, Jesus is going to be made king. He's going to overthrow the government. He's going to be the king here in Jerusalem, and he's going to be the king of all the Jewish people, and it's going to be great. We're going to be right there with him. And so, we're here to see how that plays out. So the problem is, if Jesus says, yes, pay your taxes to Caesar, well, he's going to lose all of his followers, right? Because they're like, we're about to overthrow Caesar. And then if he says no, well, all these people who he knows are here to spy on him are going to go back to Caesar, and that will get him crucified as a religious zealot. And that's ultimately what does happen. So verse 23. Jesus saw through their duplicity and said to them, show me a denarius. So he pulls out a coin. He says, whose image and inscription is on it? Caesar's. He said, hey guys, what's up? So it says Caesar's. So they would have pulled out a coin, and there would have been a face on it. And this is not a denarius. This is just a dollar coin. Okay, but there would have been a face on it, just like this. There would have been Caesar's face on it. Okay? And so he said, whose image and inscription on it? And so our coins say, in God we trust. Their coins actually would have said something very similar. It would have said Caesar is Lord, which would have been meant Caesar is God. Okay? And so it would have had his face on it, and it would have said Caesar is Lord. Okay? So whose image and whose inscription on it? Caesar's, they said. So he said to them, we'll give back to Caesar's what's Caesar's, and to God what is God's. And they were unable to trap him in what he said there in public, and were astonished by his answer, and they became silent. Now, when you read this, this is historically a text, a proof text that people use and say, okay, well, I guess we do have dual citizenship. Right? You give to Caesar what's Caesar's, you give to God what's God's, right? It sounds like you have one foot in each camp, right? Both heaven and the state, both God and country, this kind of thing. And so, we would look at that and say, okay, it seems like we can have allegiance to one thing, allegiance to another thing. But the problem with that is that if you have two allegiances to something, ultimately there's going to have to be compromise somewhere, okay? Because at some point, God's going to ask you to do one thing, and Caesar's going to ask you to do one thing, and who are you going to do it for, okay? Who are you going to give it to? And maybe they might ask you to do opposite things. So God's going to ask you to do one thing, and then the government is going to ask you to do another thing. Well, whose law are you going to obey? Who are you going to listen to? Because, we give to Caesar what's Caesar's and God's what's God's. And so we just, a lot of times we look at that and go, okay, there's two camps there. But this text is actually saying the opposite of that. That's why he says, show me this coin. He says, whose face on it? Caesar. Whose inscription is on it? Caesar. Now, every Jewish person there would have known what he was saying, because he would say, whose image is on it? Now, that means this coin bears the image of Caesar. Okay? Well, in Judaism, who bears the image of God? You do. Right? Humans. This is Genesis 1:27, in the image of God. God made male and female in them, I don't remember how it goes exactly, right? He made them in the image of God, male and female, right? And so they would have known that this is, that when Jesus says whose image is on it, he would have been saying, is this the image of God? Because it would have been illegal within Judaism to build an image of God. There was no image of the living God, because you and I are the image of the living God. That God put us in this world to show the rest of creation who God is, and then to take the praises of creation and to direct them back to God. And so Jesus would have held up this coin and said, whose image is on this? Like Caesar's. So this would have been seen as idolatrous to them. Right? They would say, there's the image of another God on this coin. And so what Jesus is basically saying to them, he says, are we really going to divide up, or are we really going to split as a people over this thing of how much of this idolatrous metal we should keep for ourselves? If you take this literally, Jesus is saying, you should give all your money to Caesar. For all I care, because it's all his. Right? It's all idolatrous. It's none of what God wanted. And so Jesus is asking a very interesting question. And the real question that Jesus is asking is this. He says, are you going to give to God what bears his image? Give to Caesar what bears his image. I don't care about that stuff. Right? But are you going to give to God what bears his image, which is your whole self, which is you? Is your allegiance to Caesar, or is your allegiance to God? Because what bears God's image is you, and that is what you should return to God. So give to Caesar what's Caesar's. Who cares about that? But are you giving to God what belongs to God, which is you and me, those who bear his image? So Jesus doesn't come and say, I'm going to establish this kingdom. I'm going to show you how life is intended to look with God. And you know what? I'm also going to settle all your pressing political questions. And I'm coming to show you life as God intended, and I'm going to give you like a democratic government and those kind of things, right? So Jesus actually comes to show us life the way that God intended it, which is this, that there's freedom that's not dependent upon Caesar. Right? There's freedom in your life that's not dependent upon institutional powers. There's purpose in your life that is defined by what it means to be in a loving covenant relationship with God. That's what drives us. That's what our purpose is. It's not built on duty, right? Caesar says, hey, you owe this to me, right? This is your duty. God says, no, you can find purpose outside of that, right? He says, you don't have those. Paul would call that the old way. That's the old way. Jesus says, no, step into the new way, right? And what happens is when you take a text like this and you try to split the difference with Jesus, what you always get is this watered down version of Jesus, right? This fake watered down version of Jesus, right? You miss out on all that he has for you. You know, that's the problem here. I want to look at in Philippians. Look at a couple verses here. Okay, Philippians it says, but our citizenship is in heaven. Okay, Philippians 1, above all else, we must live as citizens in heaven, conducting ourselves in a manner worthy of the good news of Christ. 1 Peter, you must live here as temporary residents. Again, friends, I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners, for this is the way the early Christians saw themselves, to keep away from worldly desires that wage war against our very souls. Now, a lot of times we just read this, okay? We say temporary residents, and in our mind we say, okay, we're temporary residents because, you know, we're here for now, but then one day we'll die and we'll go to heaven. And that's what it means. That's not what this is saying at all. If you understand the New Testament, you'll understand that the kingdom of God is an eternal kingdom, okay? It's an eternal kingdom, and it's actually not an eternal kingdom in some like far-off place. It's an eternal kingdom that is breaking into here and now into our world, and that ultimately heaven is making its way to earth. And so we're temporary residents here, not because one day we're going to escape and go to heaven, but because we live under temporary powers. Okay? One day America will die and go away, right? I mean, nobody likes to hear that. Hopefully, no time soon, because, you know, it'd be terrible for us. But ultimately, the powers of this world, the institutions, governments of this world, they're going to pass on, and so we're only temporary residents here, because the nations that we serve are only temporary, but God's kingdom is eternal. Okay, and so if you follow Jesus, your allegiance is not to like a political party. This is going to go away one day. Your allegiance is not to like a president, the past one, this one, the future one, right? Your allegiance is ultimately to Jesus because he's your king and he's the eternal king. And so you can't use scripture like where Paul says submit to authority to justify behavior that doesn't line up with Jesus. In Acts 4, Peter and John, okay, the authorities arrest them, and this is what it says. I don't have it on the screen, but I'll read it to you. It says, and they called them again and commanded them not to speak and teach it all in the name of Jesus. So the authorities to take Peter and Paul say, hey, you can't teach in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John, it's not Peter and Paul, Peter and John replied, which is right in God's eyes, to listen to you or to listen to him? You be the judges. As for us, we cannot go speaking about what we have seen and what we have heard. So this is the deal. God is authority over all, right? He wants your complete allegiance. He also said, you know, the Bible does say submit to government. It also says submit to your community, your church that you're a part of. It also says submit to your parents. It says submit to your pastor. That's a great one. It says submit to your spouse. It says submit to your employer, right? All of these things, we submit to these authorities because God tells us to do so. But any authority in your life that doesn't first submit to God on a particular issue, then you should not follow them there, right? Because their authority comes from God. If they're not submitted to God, well, then they are doing this thing of having a dual allegiance. And so you're called to have a singular allegiance. So you should only commit to them to the extent to which they are committed to God. If their authority doesn't come from God in any area of your life, well, then their authority is lost on you as a citizen of God. In other words, if there's a law or a command by authority that doesn't align with Jesus, then you submit to Jesus. It's as simple as that. And so our allegiance, you know, the example Jesus uses here is the government, but it extends much, much farther than that. I want you to think of like if you're in a relationship with your spouse or your significant other, your one allegiance is to Jesus. That's your covenant relationship. That covenant relationship extends to those relationships in your life, right? Greatest commandment is to love God and to love people. So if your one allegiance is to God in your marriage, well, then you are going to love your spouse and treat your spouse in the way that God would want you to love and treat your spouse. Okay, and that's true with a friendship, right? And a friendship, you know, you're going to love your friend in the way that God wants you to love your friend, because your primary, your only allegiance is to God, and that extends to others. Now, this is the thing about that, right? That means that God must have authority in that relationship. God must have authority in your marriage. You must have authority in your relationship with your children. You must have authority in your relationship with your friends. Because if the authority is coming from anywhere else, well then you're clinging to this idolatrous thing, right? Your allegiance is divided. And so for your next episode today, it's very simple. Just never forget that your one allegiance is to Jesus, and your real citizenship is in the kingdom of God, right? And so that means that we operate as a foreigner and as an exile here in the kingdoms of this world, right? That their authority doesn't have the same power over us that Christ's authority does, right? So you can prefer one political leaning or another, right? But your allegiance is never to that. Your allegiance is ultimately to Jesus, and to the extent to which a political party differs from what Jesus would want you to do, you should not submit to that. Okay, you should submit completely to Jesus, right? You can prefer one authoritative figure in your life, a president, a teacher, a pastor, an author, a parent, an officer of the law, whatever it is. You can prefer one or the other, but ultimately, if they ask you to do something that Jesus would ask you to do, you should not submit to their authority, because they're not submitting to the authority of Jesus. Okay, so your one allegiance is not to anyone other than Christ, because those are all part of the temporary, right? That's why you're a temporary resident. It's because those things are temporary. Ultimately, those things will fade away, and the God of the universe is eternal. Okay, and so if you give your allegiance away, you're robbing God of the glory that He deserves, and you're robbing yourself of the person that God created you to be, the relationship, the fullness of the relationship with God, and what He would want that to look like. And just whenever you split the difference with Jesus and anything else, you just get this watered down version of Jesus, and you don't have to go far to look through news articles to find, anytime a government or a political party takes hold of Jesus and tries to use Jesus, you get a watered down version of Jesus. You just don't get the true version, and you miss out on the true life that Jesus has for you. And so you can experience the life that God has intended for you, but what that's going to do is that's going to give you freedom. The freedom in Christ says, I don't have to be committed to one political party or the other. I don't have to be committed to one country or the other. I can love the people. I can be committed to the people, because that's part of the covenant relationship that I have with God. It extends to my spouse. It extends to my friends. It extends to my children. It extends to my countrymen, but it doesn't extend to anything that claims authority outside of God. And so if those things don't get authority from God, then I don't submit to them anymore, to the extent that then what I would to the extent that they're committed to Jesus. So if they ever ask me to do anything that Jesus would ask me to do, then I submit to Jesus. And so when you have that relationship with Jesus, remember, your purpose does not come from duty that you owe to anybody. Your purpose comes from being in a covenant relationship that's built on love and trust and commitment that's never going to go away. It's eternal. That duty that you feel like you have toward anything else, it's temporary. It's temporary. Jesus says, live as if you're a temporary resident there, because what I'm doing is eternal. He says, don't waste your one allegiance to something that's not going to last. All right, let's pray, and then we'll worship some more. Dear God, we come to you today, and we just we ask that we take your text seriously. That sometimes you say stuff that challenges our worldview and kind of who we've been raised to be, and what it means to be committed to one thing or another, whether that's a country or a relationship or a sports team or whatever it is that we say we have allegiances to. God, we just ask that we would have one allegiance to you, that we would be fully devoted to you in everything, and that we wouldn't get sidetracked by things that are idolatrous and that ask us to pledge allegiance to them despite what you say, but that we would filter everything through our commitment to you. That's your name we pray. Amen.
Let's respond in worship.
with God the Lord Most High. Hidden glory and grace, now revealed in you are Christ. What a beautiful name it is! What a beautiful name it is! The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is! Nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. We didn't want heaven without us. So Jesus, you brought heaven down. Sin was great, your love was greater. No one could separate us now. What a wonderful name it is. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a wonderful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. Death could not hold you. Veils tore before you. Silence the voice of sin and grave. The heavens are roaring, the praise of your glory. For you are raised to life again. You have no rival, you have no equal, now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom, yours is the glory, yours is the name above all names. What a powerful name it is. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a powerful name it is. Nothing can stand against. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus.
guys, thank you so much for coming today. And after I get done with announcements and the dismissal, we'll take about 5 minutes, and then we'll circle up in the back. And so if you're new, normally after the service we do groups, and we discuss, we read through the Bible. We're reading through Mark right now, and so we'll discuss Mark 12 that we read this week as a church. And so stick around and be a part of that. We'll circle up in the back and do that. A couple of quick announcements before we go. First, don't forget about our neighborhood walk at 5 o'clock on Tuesday, okay? Second thing I want you to do is pull your phone out, okay? Pull your phone out. Pull up tablecommunitychurch.com. Pull up tablecommunitychurch.com, and I want you to see how this works for yourself, and how like great a tool this is to use to invite people with. So go click plan your visit, and then plan your visit for next week, okay? So go in there, fill your information, and then you'll see it sends you a text, and it'll send you a reminder next weekend. It'll send you a reminder next Sunday morning, and then if I mark you as here, you'll even get a thank you for coming to church the following week, okay? And so we want to really utilize this as we gear up toward Easter. You know, we talk about how Easter is one of those times of year where people haven't been to church in a long time would just show up, you know. And so for a lot of people, Easter was that one time of year when Grandma drug you to church by your ear, and you had to dress up and take family pictures, and you didn't understand, but you were happy as long as that Easter bunny laid eggs for you, chocolate eggs, and you got them in a basket, right? So we really want to use this tool to invite people to Easter as well. So we're going to be doing a lot of stuff. We're going to send a mailer out to 5,000 closest residents to the church, and so we'll do some Facebook advertising. So like that stuff, share that stuff when you see it online. It will direct them to a landing page where they can, plan their visit and that kind of stuff as well. And then the Thursday before Easter, which is Monday, Thursday, which is usually the day that you celebrate the table during Holy Week, we're going to do a neighborhood meal at the Needmore Center. And so we're going to get some door hangers in a couple of weeks leading up to Easter. We'll put those door hangers out. We're going to invite the neighborhood to a meal. If you were here at the 1st of December when we did a neighborhood meal, it was amazing. We probably had 35, 40 people from the neighborhood show up to be a part of a neighborhood meal, so you're going to want to be a part of that as well. And then I'm also going to give you guys some invite cards as well that you can just kind of, like business cards, you can keep in your back pocket and invite people to Easter that way as well. Table Community, you are sent. Website photography brought to you by Craig Millets.
I think that's what was popping.